Sit back, relax, and imagine you're stepping into a cozy music club in the heart of Chicago, sometime in the early 1970s. The lights are dimmed, the small stage is lit by a simple spotlight, and the hush of an expectant crowd fills the air. A short, smiling man with a guitar steps out before you. He has a twinkle in his eye, like he's got a joke or two in store, maybe even a gentle jab at mortality itself. You feel a curious warmth radiating from him, the kind that tells you, even before he speaks, that this performer understands some deep and powerful truths about being alive. Then, without hesitation, he strums a chord and lets loose a playful introduction in a clear, confident voice. This is Steve Goodman. The very essence of Steve Goodman's life often reads like a triumphant contradiction. It's a story of a man who took the knowledge of his impending death and transformed it into hope, humor, and breathtaking creativity. It's an invitation to reflect on how we respond to adversity, how we greet the worst news life can throw our way. Do we crumble under it, or do we turn it into something astonishingly life-affirming? For Steve, the choice was always the latter. He never hesitated to talk openly about his leukemia, sometimes calling it the hitchhiker he carried around. And even though doctors told him his life expectancy was drastically shortened, even though every day presented a new struggle against the disease's quiet progression, he took his guitar on the road anyway. He played in dusty folk bars, grand concert halls, on TV specials, in stadiums, anywhere and everywhere the music took him. Audiences would often leave his shows feeling exhilarated, inspired, and a little more awake to the sweetness of the time we have. To really understand why Steve Goodman's story matters and how he became such a revered presence in the American folk scene, we need to travel back to post-war America, particularly the Midwest. Born in 1948, he grew up in a country experiencing massive cultural and social shifts. The old guard of mainstream pop music was giving way to the rebellious currents of rock and roll, the earnest protest songs of the folk revival, and the introspective songwriting that emerged in the late 1960s. Chicago, Steve's hometown, was then and remains a vibrant tapestry of musical styles: blues, jazz, folk, and soul. So, from an early age, he was immersed in a city that cherished musical authenticity, and he found himself shaped by the movement that was soon to come. The folk clubs he frequented, like the Earl of Old Town, were breeding grounds for some of the greatest singer-songwriters of the era. While Bob Dylan was changing the game on an international scale, Chicago was forging its own eclectic scene, mixing old blues with acoustic guitars and heartfelt lyricism. But Steve Goodman didn't simply adopt folk music like a hobby. He lived inside it. His earliest explorations in music revealed a sharp wit and an ear for catchy melodies. By the time he entered his teens, he was writing his own songs, forging the distinctive blend of humor and heartbreak that would come to define his career. And here's where we uncover one of the seldom discussed truths about him. While many folk artists found their voices in political anthems and social protests, Steve's calling was more intimate. He could address broader cultural moments from a personal angle, like the generational turbulence of the 1960s, the Vietnam War era, the cynicism that crept in after Watergate. Yet he also had a gift for slicing straight to the heart of individual experience. Listeners could feel like he was singing right to them about their daily struggles and joys. It didn't take long for his talent to catch the attention of established musicians. Chris Christopherson famously became one of his great supporters. John Prine, another folk luminary from the Chicago scene, became one of his closest friends, and the two would go on to influence each other's writing styles profoundly. Jimmy Buffett described Goodman as a performer who could make people laugh and cry in the same show, sometimes in the same song. This reputation of simultaneously balancing comedy and tragedy was something that set Steve Goodman apart, even in a field known for its poet minstrels. At the age of 20, a time when most young adults are just beginning to chart their lives, Steve received the crushing diagnosis of leukemia. The doctors made it clear that his life could be drastically cut short. Depending on the stage and progression, some predicted he wouldn't live past his 30th birthday. This revelation, however, didn't push him into despair. Instead, it lit a fire under his creativity and resolve, making him far more daring in his stage presence and in the subjects he addressed in his songs. Perhaps one of the most remarkable features of his life is how openly he acknowledged his mortality. He didn't cloak it in secrecy. He joked about it, wrote about it, and even used it to remind audiences that every moment counts. There's an anecdote from one of his shows. Someone greeted him backstage asking how he was feeling, and he quipped, "I've got the blood of a folk singer and chronic leukemia." That gallows humor might startle some people, but for him it was a way of staying grounded, staring his predicament in the face without succumbing to its grip. As the late 1960s blurred into the 1970s, America was spinning with cultural upheaval. Music was protest, it was social commentary, but it was also leaning into more introspective, confessional styles. Steve entered this fray with a heartfelt directness that spoke of everyday life, train journeys, baseball games, family moments, and the sometimes painful awareness that all of it can end too soon. And then came City of New Orleans, his biggest songwriting triumph, written around 1970. It's a tune that many people still don't realize was Steve's creation, because Arlo Guthrie first popularized it, and then Willie Nelson took it to the top of the charts. Steve sold the rights to the song at one point, likely to help with medical bills, and watched as it took on a life of its own. But it wasn't just a commercial success. City of New Orleans became a kind of American travelogue anthem, a nostalgic ode to the heyday of trains, and a gentle lament for a swiftly changing country. Performing live was Steve's lifeblood. He was often described as someone who didn't just want to sing, he needed to sing. Those who saw him on stage rarely forgot the experience. Despite standing just 5'2", he radiated an enormous presence, quick humor, a bright grin that reached his eyes, and the sense that no matter how big the stage or how large the crowd, he was right there in the moment connecting with you personally. He toured relentlessly, opening for artists like Bob Dylan, forging tight bonds with John Prine, and charming his way into the hearts of audiences around the nation. This frequent touring, in spite of his health constraints, is where he left an indelible mark. He'd walk on stage, maybe carrying the invisible weight of his medical prognosis, but once he hit that first chord, he was unstoppable. His sets could move seamlessly from silly ditties about the minor frustrations of everyday life to deeply introspective ballads about facing mortality. If you look back at the folk archives, you'll find performance tapes that show exactly that range. In one breath, he's inviting the crowd to laugh with him, perhaps telling a story about a comedic mishap he had on the road. And in the next, he's singing a bittersweet line that reminds you he's not immune from heartbreak or fear. One rarely mentioned story reveals just how persistent and gutsy he could be. Legend has it, he once cornered Arlo Guthrie in a bar, determined to make him hear City of New Orleans. Steve believed so fervently in the song's power that he pestered Arlo until he finally got him to listen. Guthrie, impressed by the track's melodic and lyrical richness, recorded it. That single act effectively launched Steve's career into a new stratosphere, though ironically, it was Guthrie's name that most people would associate with the hit. Steve might have quietly longed for more recognition for his authorship, But in typical Goodman fashion, he mostly shrugged it off. The important thing was that the song was alive in the world, carrying a slice of his imagination out to countless listeners. Humor was never optional for Steve Goodman. In fact, it served as his anchor in the storm of his own health struggles. Around the time that Chicago's beloved baseball team, the Cubs, continued their famously tortured quest to win a World Series, Steve penned a dying Cub fan's last request. The song poked fun at the team's perpetual heartbreak, capturing the frustration and loyalty of Chicago's long-suffering fans. It was comedic, irreverent, and precisely the kind of biting wit that made people either laugh or cringe if they were deeply superstitious about their sports team's luck. Some folks found it borderline blasphemous, others adored it, but it was a reflection of Steve's own worldview. You don't run away from misfortunes, you meet them head on, laughing if you can, singing if you must. As the years passed, Steve's reputation continued growing in folk and singer-songwriter circles, though he never broke through to the same commercial heights as, say, Bob Dylan or James Taylor. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was more interested in genuine human connection. He had a knack for bridging the gap between heartbreak and humor, forging a distinct style that, to this day, few artists fully replicate. John Prine would later remark that if he'd ever found himself in a dark place, Steve was the guy who could coax him out of it with a sly remark or a story about the ridiculousness of human existence. Chris Christopherson lauded Steve's gifts for lyricism and comedic timing, an unusual blend that endeared him to audiences but may have made it trickier for record labels to categorize him. Indeed, was he a comedic folk singer, a serious poet, both? The truth is that he was irreducible to a single label, and that might have influenced the trajectory of his career. Underneath all this, the leukemia was a constant drumbeat, reminding him that time was short. He underwent treatments that at times left him exhausted. But the moment he regained enough energy to perform, he was back on the road. Some nights his health would falter, and close friends would worry that the traveling was too physically grueling. Yet Steve, always with a grin, would assure them he had no intention of letting life slip by uncelebrated. Writing new material, recording albums, and making people laugh and cry at the same time was, in his view, the best possible use of his remaining years. One longtime friend recalled that Steve would often say something along the lines of, "I don't need extra time, I just need good time." That philosophy permeated not just his music, but the way he interacted with loved ones, colleagues, and acquaintances. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, changes in the American music scene were profound. Disco had dominated the latter half of the 70s, and new wave was on the rise. Folk, though still adored by its dedicated fan base, was no longer at the forefront of mainstream radio. Nevertheless, Steve kept making records. He collaborated with people like David Allan Coe on "You Never Even Called Me by My Name," a tune that famously added a perfect country and western verse at the end, making it a comedic gem with a life of its own. This song remains a staple for certain country and folk fans who appreciate its tongue-in-cheek lyrics about what truly qualifies as a quintessential country track. Steve's footprints appear in surprising places if you track them carefully enough. He was that friend in the background, co-writing, collaborating, or simply cheering on other artists. He had a generosity of spirit that made him a beloved presence in studios and backstage gatherings. Despite his self-effacing nature, there were glimpses of frustration. How could there not be? He'd poured his soul into music, achieved critical acclaim, earned the admiration of the greats, and yet mainstream stardom eluded him. Perhaps if he'd lived longer, there might have been a late career surge, but that's a question that history will never answer. Some who were close to him suggested that he had come to terms with it. His real measure of success was in the personal connections he forged. He saw how a city of New Orleans had touched millions. He witnessed crowds in Chicago singing along to Go Cubs Go, a rousing tune he wrote to celebrate his beloved, beleaguered team. He saw, night after night, in hundreds of clubs and theaters, the immediate effect of his music on people's faces: laughter, tears, introspection. For him, that was the most authentic scoreboard of all. The final months of his life were a roller coaster. His health deteriorated, and the energy that had always defied his prognosis began to wane. Even then, he recorded new songs and kept performing when possible. In a bittersweet twist, right around the time of his passing on September 20th, 1984, his composition City of New Orleans was up for a Grammy, courtesy of Willie Nelson's popular version. Unfortunately, Steve didn't live to see the song's Grammy win in early 1985. He was gone just a few days too soon. When the news of his death spread, there was a collective moment of realization across the folk community. A bright and singular voice had been silenced. For many who knew him casually, there was a sense of shock, not only because 36 is heartbreakingly young, but because Steve had projected such positivity. He seemed to defy the notion that leukemia could claim him. Of course, those who were more intimately acquainted with him understood how tenuous his condition had always been. They had witnessed his quiet bravery, the doctor visits, the rounds of chemotherapy, and all those hidden physical struggles behind the smile on stage. Still, his passing felt abrupt and unfair, like losing a friend you just barely got to know. Looking more deeply into his personal life, beyond the stage persona, you find a man devoted to his family. He was married to Nancy Goodman, and he cherished his daughters. For him, fatherhood was both a dream come true and a serious challenge, given his medical situation. He worried about not being around to watch them grow up, about missing out on so many future milestones. Yet he poured as much love as he could into them during the time he had. Those close to the family remember him telling his children stories, writing them songs, and making them laugh with his trademark wit. Tragically, that fear of leaving them so soon was realized in 1984, but the memory of his paternal warmth endured and became a guiding light in their lives. His daughter Rosanna, for instance, would later speak about the ways in which her father's humor and determination shaped her perspective on overcoming obstacles. While Steve's name was never as large as Dylan's or Paul Simon's in many ways, his influence rippled out through countless channels. Musicians who performed with him or saw him live often walked away inspired to take more risks, to fuse humor and pathos. His stage persona was liberating for younger singer-songwriters who had been unsure about mixing comedic elements into their sets. He proved that you could slip from laughter to tears and back again, and that it wasn't only acceptable, it was what made a performance memorable. His death sparked a broader conversation within the music community about how we remember artists who don't achieve mainstream superstardom, but who've left a rich legacy of songs. Should we measure their success by chart positions and radio play, or by the depth of their influence on peers and devoted fans? In Steve's case, the consensus among many respected figures is that his artistry was top tier. His rightful place is beside those who shaped American folk music during its vibrant revival. Over the decades, younger artists digging into the history of singer-songwriters often stumble upon Goodman's discography and react with the same sense of delightful discovery. How did I not know about him sooner? In reflecting on his life, it's important not to reduce him purely to the role of the man who fought leukemia. Yes, that battle was woven into the fabric of his identity, and it colored how he approached his career. But he never allowed himself to be defined solely by his illness. He was, first and foremost, a musician, a father, a husband, a friend, a genuine soul who tried to make every second matter. Indeed, that might be the deeper lesson here, that acknowledging mortality can be a gateway to living more fully in the present. Looking at his lasting impact, the resonance is quite profound in Chicago, where you'll find tributes, references, and memories scattered all over. Local folk clubs still pay homage to him, telling stories of the sets he performed, the jokes he cracked, and the songs he composed. Contemporary folk musicians cover his tracks, sometimes reworking them for a new generation that might not yet realize who Steve Goodman was. For the Chicago Cubs fan community, Go Cubs Go remains a glorious earworm that leaps into the atmosphere whenever the team clinches a victory at Wrigley Field, weaving Steve's spirit into the tapestry of baseball tradition. And so, every time thousands of voices break into that tune, you can almost imagine Steve, guitar in hand, beaming on some cosmic stage. What can we learn from Steve Goodman? Perhaps that humor is not a denial of seriousness, but a powerful companion to it. That confronting our fears head-on can yield something genuinely beautiful, that a life's worth isn't always measured by its length, but by its depth of joy, love, laughter, and the connections we form. And that music has an uncanny ability to encapsulate all of that, to hold the complexities of our existence in a melody. It's also a reminder that no matter how famous we become or don't become, the sincerity and integrity of our work can carve a path to immortality. Steve may not have been a superstar, but he's arguably the type of artist who will be remembered long after some of his more famous contemporaries fade from public memory. Why? Because authenticity resonates. People crave it, especially in times when there's so much cynicism in the air. You might say that's why his spirit clings to those corners of music history, those of us still enthralled by a singer-songwriter who meant every word he sang. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.